Once again, we welcome you to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Hey, we're happy to welcome a new voice to the program this week. I want to welcome Brian Hawkins. He is a Young Voices contributor as well as a James Madison Fellow at Hillsdale College in Washington, D.C. Brian, welcome to the show. Tell us just a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you, Brian. For one, I spell my name with an I rather than a Y. But
we can forget that.
Yeah. But based out in Alexandria, Virginia, outside Washington, D.C., originally from California, veteran of the U.S. Army, did a tour of South Korea and Afghanistan, and I'm happy to be here today.
We've got a great topic to discuss, too, especially with 2024 just around the corner. You know, everybody is just kind of, all right, you know, the election circus is wowing up to speed. You have an article here titled Libertarianism Had Its Moment But Is Ill-Equipped for the Task of Saving America. And because I lean very libertarian in how I see the world, I was really intrigued by your observations here. Talk to me a little bit about, first of all, when we talk the libertarian movement or we talk libertarians, that can be a pretty broad term. What do you mean when you say, you know, libertarianism has had its moment?
Good question, because one of the things I probably didn't identify as much as I would have liked to in the article, but I think the key shift I'm discussing here is just kind of this core free market fundamentalism that has reigned over the GOP probably since the Reagan era. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that I've noticed has been a shift on the right. I know I first noticed this at the one of the recent Republican presidential primaries when I noticed like there wasn't a clearly identified libertarian candidate. You know, before we had Ron Paul, Rand Paul, Gary Johnson, and others for the past few decades whose message was primarily based upon free markets and kind of this libertarian idea. But like this time around, we don't have that clearly defined libertarian candidate. So I wanted to explore why that happened and reflect a lot upon my own transformation from doctrinaire libertarianism towards this core conservatism. And that's kind of what I talked through in this article.
I like your observation, too, that we did have a very strong libertarian candidate in Ron Paul back in 2008 and 2012. Rand Paul more or less bore the banner in 2016. But, yeah, looking at 2020, nope. and I don't really see anybody lining up for this one. Why is that? What does that signify?
Yeah, I think, you know, I see this personally within myself, but also within my broader network, professional and social. I think one of the key shifts has been a re-emphasis on cultural issues. I think a lot of people just think that our current culture is broken. You have DEI, CRT, the dramatic decline in religiosity, the trans agenda, and people just feel like almost powerless against the tide of cultural secularism. So I think people are trying to pushing back against that and kind of realizing that virtue is a core ingredient for society. You need social virtue. You need righteousness. And, I've been going back as part of my current Hillsdale Fellowship, reading some of the founding documents. And one of the things that stood out to me, and I quoted this in the article, but if you read our founders, it's pretty consistent that they view Christianity, Judeo-Christian values as a core component of liberty. And when you unravel these Christian virtues, these Judeo-Christian ethics away from society would descend inevitably into tyranny. And I almost feel like that's what's happening right now, and that as we become more immoral or even amoral, I don't think we're getting more free. I think we're actually seeing oppressiveness come across society. And the only way to restore that is just going to be a deliberate campaign to restore individual virtue within society.
Well, and the catch there, too, is the right is not immune to using the force of the state to impose its sense of virtue. But for virtue to be authentic, at least as I understand it, it's got to be freely chosen. If you can't choose it for yourself, then it's really not virtue.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And once again, I think this is one of the things I mentioned in this article is the quote from George Washington when he mentions that part of maintaining a republic is educating the citizens on these core Christian virtues in order for them to appreciate and understand freedom. So I think one of the transformations I've had personally is I reject the notion that the state is to be this neutral actor within society, whereas I think we're seeing that's not true. The state is going to promote a preferred moral code, up until the post-war era, that moral code was Judeo-Christian values. But since then, we've seen a deliberate assault on our key institutions that promoted those virtues. And now we've seen Christianity pull out from society and cultural Marxism come in and fill the void. And once again, that cultural Marxism is being promoted by the state. So I think the core takeaway from our recent experience is that, one, the state is going to promote a preferred moral code, and then we have to decide what that moral code is going to be. And for what it's worth, as I answered this article, that moral code needs to be based on Judeo-Christian values.
Wow. One thing you point out, too, is, people think, oh, I can just sit this one out. I don't really have a dog in this fight, but it doesn't matter. Not only have the institutions been corrupted, but the left, they are on a mission. They are going to convert people, like it or not. They're coming right after us.
Yeah, and when I went through my libertarian phase, that was one of my key thoughts too. It's like, whatever, do whatever you want, leave me alone. I just want to practice my faith in private. And it was really the summer 2020 that really reversed that for me when I started to realize that, oh no, the left isn't going to leave you alone. The left is going to actively promote their moral codes and impose it upon the rest of society. So we saw that with the Summer of Love and the riots of 2020, where it was you had to explicitly express your solidarity with BLM and Antifa, or else you were morally insufficient for the racial agenda. We're seeing the same thing in public schools, where it's not enough to just educate your kids. Now we have to teach them the trans agenda, and sexual identity politics. So I think the right was mistaken to believe, at least I know I was mistaken to believe that, you can just kind of hide within yourself, withdraw from society, and be left in peace. And it's like, no, the left is not going to allow that. So we need to be active in promoting our own cultural values.
Brian, tell me this: will there ever come a point where libertarians and others who lean towards personal freedom, conservatives, for instance, will be able to find enough common ground to present, a united front?
Actually, yes. I actually hope so. Because I think one thing to remain clear is that I still believe that free market is the greatest source of material prosperity. It's the best way to create material wealth. However, the object of a nation is beyond the accumulation of wealth. But nonetheless, though, I'm hoping that I know the term, new fusionism has become a bit controversial. I think I still believe in it. I think libertarians and conservatives can get together and figure out, how can we still preserve free markets while promoting cultural conservatism. I think one way is the administrative state. Libertarians and conservatives should be united in tearing down the administrative state. The administrative state is probably one of the core tools that is used by the left to impose their cultural virtue. So we weaken the administrative state, and a lot of the left's ability to promote cultural Marxism will decline.
We've got about 30 seconds here, but I want to get your take. Libertarianism really focuses on the individual, and I just want to liken that to what you're calling for, that call for greater virtue. Does it not stand to reason, too, that we want to see a surge in virtue? It's got to start as individuals.
Absolutely, but I think individuals are also responsive to the society around them in the external circumstances around them. So as much as where the government has a role to promote some of these moral codes, such as in public schools, ethics trainings that we're seeing the military and government bureaucracy, that they should have an explicitly Christian tone is essentially what I'm saying.
Okay, again, we're talking with Brian Hawkins. He is, again, a James Madison Fellow at Hillsdale College in Washington, D.C., as well as a contributor to Young Voices. Brian, where can people find you on social media?
I usually stay off Twitter. The best way to find me is going to be on LinkedIn.
And just Brian with an I, Hawkins.
Yes.
Gotcha. Thank you so much, and have a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Thank you very much. You too.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Hey, we're happy to welcome Ian Ching back to the program. He is a Young Voices contributor, and actually, Ian, you wear a couple of other pretty interesting hats as well. Take a moment and tell us just a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I am a Johns Hopkins master's candidate at the School of Advanced International Studies. My passion is in international diplomacy, but I also love science and technology, and being a space geek has been something that that's been a part of my childhood and been part of my young adulthood for a very long time. And so I thought writing this piece about space exploration is something that's like truly, passionate for me.
I love the headline, too. Private enterprise is America's key to the modern space race. Now, I think it was just yesterday I saw a tweet from Elon Musk lamenting that, from Kitty Hawk, we celebrated the anniversary of the first flight at Kitty Hawk, to the landing on the moon, I think was 66 years or something in that neighborhood. But he talks about what has really happened in the last 50 years. And I got to admit, I was a kid when man landed on the moon. But other than the International Space Station and stuff like that, we seem kind of limited in terms of what's happening in space. What are your thoughts on why that is the case?
Yeah, so there's a couple of reasons for that, but basically during the moon race, it was a Cold War type of competition between the United States and the Soviet Union, and that kind of was the primary driving factor for moving us forward in space technologies. And there's a lot of offshoot technologies that came out of the Apollo program. But after basically the Soviets said, we're not going to the moon, we can't afford it, the United States kind of just, we throttled down our space capacity. We moved to the space shuttle system, where a lot of the industry and efforts were placed into developing the space shuttle, and that was the primary mode of transportation for 40 years until 2011, when the Obama administration, well, essentially the Bush administration, decided that this is a system that's too old, we needed a new system, and so they ended the program. But they didn't have anything to replace it. There was nothing to replace the shuttles. And so all the American astronauts were taking space flights to the International Space Station on Russian Soyuz spacecraft. And this happened for approximately 10 years until the NASA Commercial Crew Space Program, in partnership with SpaceX and Boeing, decided to develop a bunch of new human-rated spacecraft. And so the first one went up in 2021, I believe, with the SpaceX Dragon 1 capsule.
So tell me a little bit about private enterprise, though. One thing you point out in your article is even, when at the pinnacle of the space shuttle program, it was still pretty expensive. The cost of launching, a kilogram of weight into space was quite expensive compared to today. I'm getting pretty used to seeing a lot of the SpaceX launches and so forth, that are being carried on the internet. It seems like that cost has come way down, and there appear to be a lot more private companies that are making it possible for people to put things in low Earth orbit.
That's very true. SpaceX is possibly the leading contender in the world for tonnage to orbit, and that is it's beating China, it's beating every competitor in the United States. for some context for your audience, the space shuttle would have cost $54,000 per kilogram to go to low Earth orbit, whereas for now, for the Falcon 9, which is a SpaceX rocket, it would cost about $3,000 per kilogram. So that's orders of magnitude decrease for that industry. And what that means is it's going to open doors to a lot of companies on the ground. It's going to open doors for universities. It's going to open doors for different types of medical research that are going to now be able to afford to build something or to put something in a satellite and send it to orbit. It's not going to be as expensive. So we are going to see an explosion, I believe, in the space industry, where you're going to have a lot more innovation, a lot more science and technology progress in the United States, thanks to SpaceX and to other private industries, are going to be the reason why the United States stays ahead.
So talk to me about where China is. Now, look, I've seen a couple of videos, and I assumed they were a joke, but presumably it was, look, China has landed on Mars or landed on the moon or so. I mean, it clearly looked like a cartoon or some kind of, animation. But how seriously do we need to take China? I mean, they've got a lot of resources, and I'm sure they put research in. Are they moving up in the space race?
Well, for China, they do have a space industry, and they do have a very robust space industry. However, theirs is a state-led type of organized industry, which is very similar to how the United States ordered our industry in the 1960s. However, for China, it's a much more of a prestige project, right? It's much more about in their own perspective, raising their national pride in these things. And so the moon landings with the rovers is impressive from a technical standpoint. But what's more important, I think, is China has a space station of its own, which is separate from the United States. And China's long-term goal, of course, across all geopolitical questions, is to overtake the United States as a leader of the world, right? And so part of that is going to be symbolizing to the world that, we are a technological peer to the United States. We are also able to, put things in space. And that's something that we can't discount for China. And so one of the concerns I noted in my article was that China is trying to create its own sort of group of buddies, of other middle powers, of other space countries, to essentially form a separate bloc from the United States, right, in being a leader in space. And so that's the main concern that a lot of American foreign policymakers have with regards to space and space competition.
We're down to about 2 minutes left in our segment here, but Ian, I wanted to ask you about what do you see on the horizon as far as the next big deal in space travel or space, just utilizing, industry in space. The moonshot was, I think, a pretty good pinnacle. We've had some other pretty good ones with the International Space Station. What do you see on the horizon that gives you reason to celebrate?
Yeah, so in the near horizon, we're going to have the decommissioning of the International Space Station, which has been the primary platform for the United States to do research in space. But we're going to see a lot more commercial space stations going up, right? So there are a lot of private companies, Blue Origin, Axiom, they've been developing their own space stations. And SpaceX is developing the Starship system, which is this huge, massive rocket that's more powerful than the Saturn V, which is the rocket that took us to the moon, more powerful than the Space Shuttle, more cargo capacity. And so with that rocket that's under testing right now in Texas, and probably within the next half decade it's going to be fully operational, you are going to see a lot more human infrastructure in space, which is run by American companies, where NASA and other government agencies would be a partner to those organizations. And that's what we're most likely going to see. And I think we're also going to see a huge explosion in tourism and other types of research.
Okay, so here's the big question that pops into my head. Will government get out of the way and allow, the private enterprise people to have the freedom to operate, to really move this at a good clip? Or are we going to have to deal with that bureaucratic oversight for the foreseeable future?
I think government is going to have to move out of the way. There is a place for government, but when you look at what China is doing, they're plowing full speed ahead. And if the United States doesn't do that, we're going to fall behind.
Okay, again, we are talking with Ian Ching. He is a Young Voices contributor, also a Beyond Earth Institute research contributor, and a master's candidate in international relations at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. I want to thank you, Ian, for rekindling my excitement for looking skyward. I remember as a kid, it was a big deal, and I kind of want to feel that same excitement. Where can people find you on social media?
Everyone can find me on Twitter or X, as it's now called. I'm at Ian Ching 685. You can also find me on Instagram by that same
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Ethan Brown back to the show. Ethan is a Young Voices contributor as well as the creator and host of The Sweaty Penguin. How are you, Ethan?
I'm good. Happy holidays, Brian.
I should mention the Sweaty Penguin podcast so people don't say, I should get one of those for my kid for Christmas. But
well, you should do that too.
How are things going for you?
Things are going well. I was saying before we hopped on, I just moved back to Connecticut, so looking forward to a bit of a change of pace in the new year. Exciting stuff coming for the Sweaty Penguin, so go check us out wherever you get your podcasts.
You and I have the chance to talk on a fairly semi-regular basis, and it seems like we always end up talking about climate. And so I know you've probably been busy here for the last couple of weeks with the 2023 UN Climate Change Conference in Dubai. What are your thoughts? Did you attend by any chance?
I did not attend. I tried to follow as best I could and didn't get to follow as closely this year as in previous years because of the move I was doing. But I actually went into the conference more pessimistic than normal for a few reasons. I think I'm a little frustrated with the United Nations right now and international diplomacy in general. I also think that the president of the conference this year is also the CEO of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. There were a lot of scandals around his team kind of trying to play him up as more of a climate ally. And to me, I was hopeful that he, as an oil CEO, could maybe help bridge some of the divide between climate folks and fossil fuel companies, but was starting to lose faith in that idea as some of these negative stories were coming out. The conference ended up going better than I thought, though. They put together an agreement that wrote in a transition away from fossil fuels, and this is a document that every single country in the world signs. So China signed this, India signed this, Saudi Arabia signed that. Like everybody said that they're good with this. And on the one hand, writing your name on a piece of paper does not mean actually doing it, but a lot of this progress is already happening. And to get people to say the words transition away from fossil fuels, that's the first time this has happened. And I think that's something to be excited about.
So what kind of timeline are they looking at? I mean, did they agree to by this year we will have transitioned away fully, or is it just we're going to be fixing to work on getting ready to begin? You understand?
Yeah, certainly not this year, and I don't think anyone wants that. In terms of possible timelines, I haven't actually gotten to read the full agreement yet, but my understanding is this is going to take some time. Obviously, this is going to take time. The timeline at which it is possible really depends on how ambitious people want to be. And it's important, obviously, to not just do it, but do it in a way that is economically beneficial. Today, we see a lot of clean energy like solar and wind and nuclear not only can compete with fossil fuels, but often outcompete fossil fuels. So finding ways to kind of incentivize that, pull back some of the red tape that holds some of these energy sources back, that's all really exciting. I think realistically, it's possible to do a pretty significant level of the transition within the end of the decade, and maybe shoot toward 2050-ish for an end date. And again, that doesn't mean fossil fuels are gone. It means we just need to make sure that it's carbon neutral so we're not worsening the climate situation we have right now.
Okay. Yeah, that was kind of I was wondering if, they had kind of a firm date in mind, but it sounds like the agreement that they signed says this is what we're willing to work toward without saying, and here's the date that it's all going to be accomplished.
Yeah, to me, what I would see as more important than putting your name on this piece of paper is, what does the accountability look like? How are countries communicating what they're going to do? Are they transparent about it? Is everyone willing to work together, or is this kind of going to be people on their own getting this done type of thing? I think that there's a certain level of every country is a sovereign nation. You create your own policies. That's well and good. But if countries can be transparent with each other, share ideas within reason, I think that can be a helpful thing for everybody. The goal that the world has, at least on the temperature front, is to keep global warming under 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2100. And a lot of people already are like, oh, we give up on this goal. We're already so close to it. But the thing is, it by 2100 means if we blip over it, we can bend it back down by 2100. We can actually become carbon negative and get some carbon capture going and bring it back down. So I haven't given up hope on that goal. And I think that if we take these steps that are being proposed, we can move in that direction.
And you have pointed out, Ethan, that a lot of times people will say, well, what's the point? China and India, these two hugely populous nations, they're not signing on. So what good does it do? Why should we diminish our quality of life if they're not willing to commit? But it sounds like, well, they may not be completely on board, but it sounds like they're definitely leaning that direction.
Yeah, I just did an op-ed in Newsweek about this. It came out before the conference when I was still feeling pessimistic about the conference, but remained optimistic about climate generally. And really what I was trying to say, first off, China and India are engaging on this topic. It's maybe one of the best chances the U.S. has to agree on stuff with these two countries in the scheme of other issues. India was the country at last year's COP27 that came to the table proposing at the time they were saying a phase down from fossil fuels. The language switched to transition away from fossil fuels. So they have a lot of work to do, but their stance was more playing the same game of chicken we were, where it was like, well, if we're going to phase down our coal, you got to phase down your oil and gas, and how can we work that out? China, again, lots of issues, but they're actually on track to have their carbon emissions peak in the next few years, just based on current policies. They do use a lot of coal and a lot of oil and gas, but they also are, for better or worse, they're the world leader in clean energy manufacturing and batteries. And there's a lot of issues with that, but it's the reality of the situation. I think for the U.S., we should be looking at how can we compete with China on those things, and how can we really reap the benefits of these climate solutions. That was the other thing I talked about, if you want to get into it more. Yeah,
we've got about 2.5 minutes, so let's take a few moments and go there.
Yeah, so first off, a lot of climate solutions actually help the economy if you do them right. If you create a bunch of regulations that just crush the economy, that's not good. But a lot of, like I was saying, solar, wind, a lot of these things are now economically outcompeting some of the fossil fuel alternatives. And furthermore, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in their latest report, they looked at 43 different climate solutions categories and compared them to 16 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And these are things that I think generally we'd all like to see: end poverty and world hunger, have innovation, gender equality, clean water, all stuff like that. And they would compare for each solution to each goal. Are there synergies? Are there trade-offs? Or are there a combination of the two? And they found out of 400 something of these combinations that only 12 were pure trade-offs. So what that means is we can, if we're smart about it, address climate and improve every other aspect of our society with the same solutions. That gets me really excited. That's really why I'm out here doing what I do. And I think that if the US can recognize that, stop thinking of climate action as a sacrifice, but rather as an opportunity, we should be doing it anyway, regardless of what anyone else does. And once they see us being successful with it, they'll follow our lead, and we can get all of this done.
So I have to ask, it's interesting that this climate conference was held in Dubai, with all that opulence that rests on fossil fuels. There's a lot of people that stand to lose an awful lot of money, mainly those invested in the fossil fuel industries. It's hard to imagine them getting on board unless they have some way of maintaining, their position in the game. What do you think of their options?
That's where you need to work together, and I wish people could work together more, and I hope this conference would allow for some of that to happen. There are companies like Dominion Energy is a big fossil fuel firm. They've recently erected the world's largest floating offshore wind farm. They're building a ship that will be the first U.S. Jones Act compliant ship that can install offshore wind in the U.S. So that's just one example, but there are companies that are seeing that these are viable investments. These are ways we can transition our companies into the future. And I hope everyone can get on this path because there really is a lot of opportunity to make money in these new industries.
Again, we're talking with Ethan Brown. He is a Young Voices contributor and creator and host of the Sweaty Penguin podcast. Ethan, where can people follow you on social media?
They can find me at EthanBrown5151 on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. You can find The Sweaty Penguin wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also find us on social media and on Patreon at patreon.com/TheSweatyPenguin. If you're in the holiday giving spirit and want to get some merch and bonus content, go check us out there.
Welcome back. This is our fourth and final segment of Moving Forward with Young Voices. And we're happy to welcome Samuel Mangold-Lenett back to the program. Sam, it's been a little while since we talked. How are you?
I'm doing great, Brian. How are you doing?
Fantastic. For those meeting you for the first time, take just a moment to tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm Sam Mangold-Lenett, a staff editor at The Federalist. You can find us at thefederalist.com or follow us on X, formerly Twitter, at FDRLST. So typically I work in, editing, opinion writing, trying to do some reporting here and there, but I like to cover culture, the intersection of culture and politics, and more recently, artificial intelligence, and how exactly this exploding field is going to, change how we interact with reality and how it might affect politics and culture.
Boy, I tell you, I've been dipping my toe into the AI pool here for the last few weeks. And I get a sense that as much as the internet itself changed how we do things in this world, I have a feeling that AI is going to do all that and maybe more. And I'm a noob. I'm a beginner at this. You're someone who's much more steeped in it. Talk to me about how China and AI figure into how we should approach the future.
Yeah, so I totally agree. I think AI has the potential to completely change how we interface with reality. We hear a lot about, the Terminator situation. I think that's, right now that appears to still be science fiction. AI in its current form is mostly, pattern recognition technology that will help us just get to solutions faster, essentially. The issue with China is that, they're our greatest adversary on the international stage. They've stolen billions and billions and billions of dollars of intellectual property from U.S. patent holders, and they infiltrate basically every single level of the U.S., whether it's private industry, state government, federal government, whatever it is, they're engaged in subversion. At the same time, I hate to, I knock on wood, obviously, conflict tensions are rising with China, and it's not out of the realm of possibility we engage in conflict in some coming year. AI has huge potentials for military uses for defense industries. And there's a lot of AI talent over in China because they saw the writing on the walls and started pumping money into this industry, along with quantum computing and telecommunication like 5G, to really try and get ahead of the curve on this. So they could, really corner the market. So there's a lot of talk among AI industry leaders about how we need to, partner with China, especially the West needs to partner with China, particularly the U.S., so we can, figure out how to use this technology for the betterment of humanity. It's kind of like how there was talk amongst the Manhattan Project about potentially partnering with Nazi Germany if we figure out that the bomb could destroy the world. That's kind of parallel thinking to AI. If AI does have the potential to utterly upend how humanity interfaces with reality, everyone needs to be on the same page. That's the thinking behind it.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, this is just my subjective ear. You sound more positive than pessimistic. I think you're more optimistic than not when it comes to AI. But China, it seems like there are those who are afraid, and I'm talking primarily within the U.S. government, to really talk about China, at least in an adversarial sense. Is that a bad idea? If they're, in other words, if they're just whistling past the graveyard, are they setting themselves up for regret at some future point?
I think so. And for what it's worth, I'm very mixed on AI. I think in its properly ordered AI, so to speak, that there's a difference between artificial intelligence and artificial general intelligence. So AGI is, the sentient models, totally functioning synthetic intelligence, if you will. I'm very profoundly skeptical and more pessimistic about that, the implications of what that could bring. But an AI in and of itself, I think, could be a boon for civilization and really help a lot of people. I think we have to be careful, similar to how NAFTA upended the Rust Belt and it moved some numbers up on spreadsheets and create a lot of wealth for a lot of people. It also brought in a lot of despair and has caused a lot of consequences that we have not seen any solutions to. AI, I think, does have the potential to do something on that, but on a much larger, much global scale. I think policymakers and just leaders across the board who are naive about China, they're fools. China has made it clear that they want to unseat the U.S. as a global hegemon. And if that happens, everything across the world comes tumbling down. The global economy is reliant on the U.S. If we're unseated, what happens to our debt? Things will come due. We are totally reliant on our financialization. We don't have the infrastructure set up to not be a financialized economy. So if that happens, who's to say? That said, I certainly don't want to engage in armed conflict. I think that is not a good thing at all. War is bad, disavow. I think there are certain things we can do to avoid that, but it doesn't seem as though China is interested in that at all. And they've made it clear it's not a matter of if they move on Taiwan, where our chip manufacturing, where AI is reliant upon. It's a matter of when.
And I love one thing that I really loved about your article is you pointed out the interesting juxtaposition or the visions between the way the U.S. sees the world versus how China sees it. And maybe if you'd like, walk us through, America's core value is what?
Yeah. So at the end of the day, it's naive to assume that we can, collaborate with China on such important technology because we perceive reality in totally different ways. So the West perceives reality predicated upon Christian values. China does not. They predicated upon Confucianism, if you will. Currently, the underlying ethos of the Chinese Communist Party is just to advance their rule. They see themselves as a middle country, and that doesn't mean like middle geographically. That means between earth and heaven. So they believe that everyone ought to bend the knee to China, whereas the U.S. kind of sees itself as the evangelizers of Western values. We want to bring everyone into the global community. We want to advance export prosperity, so to speak. Whether or not these are good or bad things, that's besides the point. That's just what it is. That's just what we're doing and what we have been doing since the 20th century. These are the modes we're operating in, and China being the second most powerful country in the world right now, that's what we're up against. So we're going into this assuming China is operating on the same terms as we are, but they're not. They're operating in an entirely antithetical ethos.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with some of the doors that AI opens. The more I learn, the more encouraged I am. Before, though, I was a little bit more like, here comes Skynet, watching the Terminator walk up to my front door and knock. Will there have to be some kind of a fundamental change in China's leadership? I mean, beyond just the Eastern versus Occidental thinking, their political situation is they are a communist country. If communism were not the dominant political system, would that change the equation considerably, or would we still have some things that we'd have to work out between their way of seeing the world versus the Western way of seeing it?
I think there would still be a lot of hurdles. There's still a huge collectivist mentality over in China. And obviously there's like a lot of discontent with the Chinese Communist Party that gets quashed, frankly. But this is such an entrenched mentality that's just kind of part of the milieu, if you will. Whereas, individuality is just the mode of how we operate here. So I don't really think there's a way to off-ramp for at least in our lifetimes. I think we just kind of have to acknowledge this is what it is for the foreseeable future.
What are some of the resources that you would recommend to our listening audience for people who want to get their minds around this? I mean, this can be a complex issue on any number of fronts, but if they want to delve into this and find good, timely, credible information besides your articles, what other sources of information might you recommend?
Yeah, so I'd recommend Paul Kingsworth on Substack. Abbey of Miss Roll is the name of his newsletter. And then I would recommend Return.life, which is a publication on theblaze.com. Okay.
Again, we're talking with Samuel Mangold-Lenett, and where can people find you on social media?
Yeah, so you can find me on X at SMLENETT.
Very good. Sam, great to catch up with you once again. Thanks for keeping an eye on the difficult subjects and helping make them understandable for the rest of us.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me, and Merry Christmas.
And to you too, and a Happy New Year.
Likewise.